All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just making sort of an announcement that our present series for this month is really to a large extent a continuation of the thoughts that we raised last month, and it really has to do with the myth of individuals and the myth of cultures, and my impetus to some extent for some of these titles, and titles and subject are seldom the same thing, so don't be too put off by the titles if you are so disposed, because the subject is likely to be different, and it's going to be now too, but in part were occasioned by the fact that somebody here, who is, I think is not here tonight, has presented me a couple of weeks ago with a beautifully produced book, which is called The Illustrated World of Tolkien. And its editor or author is someone named David Day, but I'll bring it out afterwards. It was too much to bring. It's really, really fabulous in terms of its illustrations primarily. So that reignited my ancient and never really absent interest in Tolkien, so that especially in the latter part of this month's talks, if all goes well, I shall comment more extensively, specifically on the Tolkienian myth. But let us say I can advance the proposition right now that Joseph Campbell was right. The great myths of the age are being born right now. When he said that all the great mythic figures are standing on a particular street corner in New York waiting for the light to change. And while that is, of course, a facetious and funny remark, the truth is that the myth of existence, the myth of the life of individual people is one that is created day by day. And for this reason, of course, it differs from age to age, and with these shiftings of the mythologems, there also can be noticed then a shift of the consciousness of the age. And so I will begin with a few remarks which are really based on Campbell. You know, Joseph Campbell wrote a great many books, but there is one that is probably less known than most of the others, and it was published toward the end of his life, and if you haven't encountered it, then maybe you should, because in it he had really sort of stated the philosophical and theoretical foundations of his approach to the myth. And that book is called The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, a very Campbellian title with that contradiction, but it's very, very interesting, and sort of Campbell really put forth his own approach to myth and how myths should be studied, how they originate, and so forth. And in so doing, I'll use this in order to introduce the remaining portion of our discussion. he concentrated on two points, saying that there are two great myths, or following the words of an earlier scholar by the name of Leo Frobenius, there are two great mythic monads. These are Leo Frobenius was a sort of late 19th century scholar and of great interest, and Campbell revered him greatly, and interestingly enough, at least for me, so did Manly Palmer Hall. I quote for Mr. Hall, other than quoting Blavatsky sometimes also, he wasn't big on quoting people. He sort of quoted himself, which I think was quite understandable and much appreciated. But he said that, anyway, Leo Frobenius was one of the most insightful scholars, students of myths throughout the ages. And he mentions there that Frobenius said that there were two great units, and he called them monads, in the culture of the types of myths. The first was joined to the physical world and could be called the cosmic myth. Well, I'll add a little bit to that of my own, not that I want to correct Campbell or Frobenius, but namely things that are observable and capable of being experienced with the senses, let's put it that way. The cyclicity of time. Time, what comes around goes around. That's the motto, shall we say. The cyclicity of time, the solar and the lunar cycles, all of these have their own mythic framework according to which people understood them and gained more insight into their own lives. And that Frobenius called that the cosmic myth. Cyclicity of time, solar and lunar cycles, seasons with the growth cycles, humans as part of nature and of the cosmos, and that these characterized at least a large portion of what we might call the myths whereby people lived in ancient times, so that you can study the Egyptian, the Greek, the Roman myths and others, and see within them embodied, at least in part, these motifs, so that this myth, the mythic monad of which I am just mentioned, has contained culture for a long time. I also wish to interject that there have been sort of wishful thinking based interpretations of this myth, particularly in the last few decades, because inasmuch as they are cosmic and nature involved, people who were extremely anxious to do that sort of thing, and often without adequate warrant, attributed what would be more or less this cycle, this mythic monad, to a feminine deity. and that is not really true, because there are feminine and masculine deities, figures, mixed in that quite a bit. And that actually, I don't think that you could not live without knowing this, but that view of that having been the age of the Great Mother and the myths of the Great Mother largely started with a German, again 19th century, actually I think he was a Swiss-German scholar by the name of Johann Jakob Backhofen, which is a nice name because in German it really means baking oven. So that immediately suggested to me when I read Backhofen that some of his theories might be half-baked. Because that sort of thing always appeals to me. And various people, feminists, and a lot of Jungians sort of hung their own theories on Backhofen, but let's say caution is advised in that regard, because let's say gender was not particularly important to the creators of myth. So this would be, let's say, the cosmic and the nature myth, which you can see sort of underneath various other mythologies in many different countries, and which has been useful and meaningful to large numbers of people. Now, the second myth, which Campbell mentions in his book, is connected with something else. As he has put it, the first mythic monad that I just mentioned really has to do with the development, the nature, and the functioning of the cosmos, both micro and macro. In other words, people wanted to find out whether there is some kind of an underlying meaning, as expressed in a meaningful story of our existence. What are these celestial luminaries like the sun and the moon? What are the other minor ones? What are the seasons and the growth and the decay of the plant life, and in other manner of the animal life all about on Earth? Because meaning, interestingly enough, and in this case, we need to attach a special meaning to the word meaning, have a characteristic, an important characteristic. And what is that? That they are embodied in a story. You find that in the Greek myths, you find it everywhere else. It's sort of like if you, to this day, so I'm told, I have not been around there, that in the Middle East, the Arab culture and so forth, if you have some portentous question to ask of a wise man, he'll always be a wise man. The women are too wise to get into the act, I think. But, the answer will almost inevitably be given by, you want to get that meaning? Let me tell you a story. So then give them a story. Because there is the kind of psycho-spiritual meaning, the sort of depth psychological Jungian kind of meaning that requires what nowadays often is called a narrative to express itself. It cannot be expressed in just a few declarative sentences, boom, boom, boom. But there has to be the ebb and flow, the emotional presence, the artistic call to beauty in the story, in order to convey that kind of meaning to us. And it's very important, because colloquially in our languages, the meaning is interpreted like this. This means that. You know, there is Jupiter, he means such and such. And that is reductionism. And that kind of an approach of equating the various mythic figures and mythic images with an abstract quality is misleading. And so it is in the story, it is in the narrative, it is in the poem, it is in the great epics that the meaning is revealed. But it is not revealed in that kind of cut and dried, abbreviated form. And this is very important, because the kind of meaning really that we are talking about is the one that affects us in a profound manner, and in a manner probably to induce creative changes within us. And that's also the difference, let us say, which is also often not recognized, that exists between symbol and a more prosaic kind of treatment. The symbol has within it a secret. A real symbol has a secret. A mere narrative of events, historical or otherwise, doesn't have a secret. Or if it has one, then it is badly put together, because it should be apparent to you. And the secret is that it can open up certain levels of meaning, of understanding, of internally stimulating and of an internally stimulating character, and that otherwise would not be present. So that is why, let's say, from a psycho-spiritual point of view, from a Gnostic point of view, the symbol is much more important than a sign. A sign just points to something. Oh, the Beechwood Drive, or something. The symbol, however, discloses insights and visions and wisdom that otherwise would not be available, and has always acted in such fashion. So that needs to be kept in mind. So let's say Frobenius's theory was, which is very nicely repeated and treated by Campbell in the early part of his book, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, that there is a second myth, or as Frobenius calls it, the second mythic monad. Well, you know, a monad, there are all kinds of ways in which the term monad has been used, but it comes from monos, meaning one, so a unitary, an overall concept, like an umbrella concept, that is composed of many parts, but still is one and has one basic meaning. So the second monad is connected with the growth of what, at least in modern psychology, we have called the ego. In other words, the the human being as an individual, not just as a product of nature, not just as a manifestation maybe of the gods, but as a separate thinking, feeling, and therefore conscious human ego is explained to us in what he calls the second myth or mythic monad. For instance, Judaism and its offspring Christianity bring the redemption of the human from bondage to the cosmos and nature. So already the Genesis myth insightfully can be interpreted as containing the keynote that the human has to become sufficiently conscious to break out of the confinement and the tyranny of nature. In other words, if otherwise, mythically, the first human pair would remain captive in the Garden of Paradise forever. But they do various things, even though they may be considered sinful by some, they do various things that bring about their release from their confinement within that natural matrix. And that is the sort of thing that he's talking about him. In the same way that we are not slaves of nature, we are not slaves of the cosmos either. I sometimes point that out to my astrologer friends. All right, you got to keep remembering that the cosmic order may have various influences. And as I think wise astrologers have said, the stars impel but don't compel. If you can look at, let's say, astrological data in that light, then you will have a reasonable attitude, a good attitude toward it, and you are not going to begin to consider yourself a pawn in the ethereal hands of celestial lords. You know, this is quite important. See, it also has to do with something that is difficult to do. Well, there are many things that are difficult to do, as I'm sure you are aware. But this is the particular difficulty that arises when you contemplate how many of your decisions, how many of your insights of consciousness and so forth are yours or are foisted on you by some external force. In ancient times, in the first monad there that Frobenius mentions, it would be that the celestial bodies, for instance, and the great powers of nature, they basically create reality for you. And all you can do is really fit into that reality, or else be unhappy about it, which I'm sure has also occurred very, very often. We need to these subtleties need to be kept in mind, and of course with the growing awareness of our own non-physical part of our nature, which we can call soul, which we can call spirit, we can call consciousness, whatever you want to call it. The more we become aware of this other within us, then the less we will bow our head to be pushed around by external influences. at least as far as the cosmos is concerned. Of course, the problem is that we are, I don't know how to put it, I think that a lot of people are susceptible to, that's a very big and portentous word, so should not be taken literally. They are subject to a proclivity to enslavement. They are either going to be enslaved by nature, or they are going to be enslaved by the stars, or they are going to be enslaved by other forces. But somehow the awareness and the acceptance of some kind of an external pressure mechanism is always there. So what happens with the second myth, the second monad, then is that human becomes aware of the limitations of life on Earth. That we are not just being influenced, say, by the stars or something like that. We are not just influenced by the forces of nature, but we are being pushed around by them. We are being tyrannized by them. And so we set up some patterns within our own lives to try to combat that. So what has happened is that, let's say, the big myth, particularly of Judaism, which is the father, mother of the monotheistic religions, including Christianity and Islam, is that the fundamental myth is the myth of Exodus, because it is a liberating of the people from a state of oppression, which of course can have many faces. But the fact is that we are all slaves in Egypt. We are all slaves in a condition that we didn't choose and that we would like to get rid of. And that being the case, then various other issues and problems arrive. So along come the forces that, at least ostensibly and in a pretending fashion, sometimes in a real fashion, they come along and say, look, I'm going to free you of that slavery. And that's the nature of modern technology. If it weren't for technology, we would have to work harder at whatever we are working at. We would the mechanical age and now the electronic age has as one of its powerful motivating factors to give us more freedom from conditions and forces that oppress us. So, once people conceived of the idea, for instance, of a robot, which incidentally, robot is a Slavic word for work. A robotnik in Russian means a worker. Workers of the world, robotniks unite. It doesn't sound quite as good. Various ways in which, with devices that we have come up with, we are trying to make it easier for ourselves. But that only goes so far. First of all, eventually, the instrumentalities which we devise to make us freer themselves turn on us and become our oppressors. Even though I think once a year or so I turn on the television set, I am completely computer illiterate, and I don't know what other sins I should confess to at the moment. But I don't have too much to do with these devices of the contemporary world. But even by thus emancipating myself from their immediate influence, I am oppressed by them. And the oppression becomes usually quite heavy. So what we devised in order to be freer becomes our oppressor. You see, there is one important sentence that at least American lingo has that I think is very important and can be universally applied to human life. And you know what that is? You can't win. You can't win. You'd like to, and you do various things, but somehow, whatever you are struggling against, Israel fighting the angel, that's what the meaning of Israel, redounds to our defeat. So we have to be very careful. The more we push against circumstances and the various instrumentalities that we have devised in order to be freer, the more eventually they impinge on us. So these are some of the issues that make life difficult. It's not anything else, but that. Everything else, I think, in life, up to a point, the frailties of the human body, of old age, all of which I'm experiencing at the present time, they are there and they will get you eventually, but they are not the issue. And they are not the issue because they are universal. Everything and every being gets old in the universe, and everything and every being deteriorates in various ways. And once you recognize that, then you can sort of wiggle around. But on the whole, what you have here is that as we try to free ourselves, let's say, of the bondage of the cosmos. I know that's a rough thing to say in front of New Agers, because, everything that's wonderful is cosmic, Well, maybe not. Fire, earthquakes, floods, all of these things, they are part of the cosmos. And they can do you a great deal of harm. So you got to be careful. There are some things in the cosmos that can be useful to you, and then there are others that can be very deleterious to you. In any event, so there is the growth of the individual human consciousness, what in modern psychology is called the ego. Ego is a Latin word for self. Ego sum, I am. The Roman would introduce himself with that. Ego sum Marcus Tullius Cicero. I am Marcus Tullius Cicero. Ego. And it became a word to conjure with, so to say, as the result of the very well-intentioned and often quite successful efforts of a Jewish medical doctor in Vienna by the name of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud came up with the idea that we have a self whereby we try to deal with the world and meet the world and meet other people. But he didn't want to give it a German name, so he gave it a Latin name, ego. And subsequently Jung modified it and made it, I think, a little more meaningful in the sense that the ego is the carrier of personal consciousness, but has its own limitations. So that the ego is really a sort of the lesser self of the individual, and that there is a greater self, or maybe more than one greater self, and that the ego has to eventually become more thoroughly imbued with the more subtle and the more sophisticated qualities of the higher self to come into his own. This is what C.G. Jung called individuation, not because he was a rugged individualist, but rather because he spoke German, and in German an individuum is a unit. And by the ego becoming more complete, becoming more of a real individual, the ego is transformed and creates a relationship for itself with other and deeper forces of the psyche. So what happens then is that the humans, once they emancipate themselves, or have to some extent done so, from the tyranny of nature and from the tyranny of the macrocosm and microcosm, of the stars, the sun and the moon and nature, then they devise rules and regulations, commandments for the human. So it seems to be our misfortune in earthly life that while we desire to be free, we so very seldom are. I don't know if that has occurred to you. If it hasn't occurred to you, maybe it ought to occur to you. And therefore, we devise rules and regulations of all kinds, and then we install governments of one kind or the other, and they devise even more heavy and oppressive rules and regulations for us. And now we are no longer pushed around by the sun and the moon and the stars, and not by the forces of nature. We are pushed around by our government. Now, isn't that nice? You see? Because apparently there is a perverse desire within us to be pushed around, and we have to become conscious of that perversity within our own nature, and then we may certainly judiciously and not with a bloody revolution, with a guillotine or something like that, but in an intelligent way, to begin to shake off the shackles of human society and to be free of the rules and the regulations which we have devised in order to act as substitutes for the tyranny of the cosmos. And so that was Frobenius's idea, that in the second mythic monad we become under the bondage of laws, of rules and regulations. It's also quite true. So the latter part of the second mythic monad then eventually brings the real effective birth of the human ego. For instance, there is, I think that would be good psychology and good history to say that the Renaissance, beginning with the 1400s, 1500s, Quattrocento, Quinquecento, and so forth, was designed to emancipate the ego of people in Western culture from medieval confinement. Eventually, this brings science and all kinds of changes, including an alienation from the God image, as Jung would call it, and in the 20th century, so I am now more or less paraphrasing Campbell, the dying of the religious dimension of the myth. Now, this is quite important. Now we may ask, first of all, what will follow? And this, I think, is a very real existential question. We, as the result of the change in the collective myth, in the mythic monad, we are now living in secular societies where the connection with a more subtle and therefore more transcendental, a deific, you can call it a religious dimension, is vanishing. And then what can it be replaced by? So Campbell gives no real answer. He doesn't tell us what will follow after he indicates that this has led now really in, at least in Western culture, and by osmosis in other cultures as well, of what he calls mythlessness, being bereft of an important myth. So the question is that the mythlessness is in itself very, very deleterious, primarily because of something that I was trying to indicate earlier, that only a meaningful myth will give meaning to our lives. Now, what does that mean? With all of its deficiencies and all of its shadow, of which I'll speak a little bit later on, with all the shadow that it cast, for in beginning with the Middle Ages, the Christian myth did supply a meaningful background for the lives of people. Now, of course, that it also supplied the fire of the Inquisition, the religious wars like the 30-Year War and so forth, really great big disasters that had as their claimed justification some religious model, but somehow in the background there was still a conscious connection with a transcendental meaning. And this has either gone away or is going away. Now, Joseph Campbell, great man, and he was a very vital, a very attractive, a very intelligent guy. To be with him for a period of time just sort of really enlivened you. He radiated the life of mind and the life of the spirit. Great guy. I will always cherish a day-long seminar, small number of people, where I participated in Ojai, California, with Mr. Campbell, because you don't get that in a public meeting with a lot of people. But once you were with Campbell for a day, you felt like $1 million. And I don't quite know what $1 million feels like because I never had that. But still, one can conjecture, So, a very great guy. He died in 1987, which is now more than a quarter century ago. So, he did not indicate what the new myth will be like, but he definitely did indicate over and over again, both verbally and in writing, that a new myth is important, and that it may be heralded by some lights that have been lit by a few people in Western culture, and that maybe if we look in these will-o'-the-wisps which have arisen, we might be able to add together the elements of a new myth which then might be helpful and transformative for the culture. Campbell felt, and I certainly agreed with him, that the new myth is likely to arise out of some of the keynotes that have been voiced, have been sounded by C.G. Jung, such as Answer to Job, his Memories, Dreams and Reflections, and of course since then the Red Book and various commentaries on it. And also of some of the more insightful followers of Jung, and I can greatly recommend all of these, of Edward Edinger, who was really a phenomenon himself. He was what Campbell was to mythology, at least in America, that Edward Edinger was to depth psychology. Astonishing man. And for instance, his works, The Creation of Consciousness, The New God Image, and of course, these brought us in Ego and Archetype, and these brought us into contact with and in the clearer focus in Jung's Red Book. So here is the question now as to what is likely to happen in our mythless life. Well, first of all, I'll sound a curious clarion call, which, again, unless it is explained, would be difficult to relate to, and that is that the new myth has to arise within each and every individual. And it can arise within the individual by way of something that all words are very inadequate in this respect, that we call inspiration. And that is really supposed to be the subject of my talk, but I already used up about half the time, so that's how it goes, But inspiratio in Latin means the entering of the spirit, in spirit, into something. So when something that didn't have a spirit gets a spirit, and it's inspired. So this, of course, is a phenomenon that we experience as humans. In different historical ages we use various ways to express it, but it is always there. It is always very important. Now in our last little series we mentioned, and we shall mention again, J.R.R. Tolkien, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, who or who acted, who brought forth, as I mentioned that time, because I was mainly quoting from The Hobbit, but it really pertains to the trilogy as well as The Hobbit, that he proclaimed a particular archetypal presence, which then became the motivating force within the Arthurian myths and also influenced other mythic structures, namely that of the once and future king. So we need to remember that there is a myth within our own natures, and that if we discover it and utilize it, then we will be subject to inspiration. So it is the great difficulty, or let's say one of the great difficulties of our culture, has been all along and still is, that we are forever looking for external, visible, tangible, gustable sources for our inspiration. And that is not where it is going to come from. Now, once you have interior inspiration, then certain linkages can occur between the inner inspiration and your external experiences. And so, in proportion to your realization of the internal realities, of the internal myth, of the story within you, which at a certain point Campbell called it the hero's journey. Well, you can call it any number of things, but once that is operative, then it really irradiates all of life with a light that it did not possess before. So to be inspired was always regarded as a sort of a little miracle. Shakespeare, I can't quite quote the whole verse, Shakespeare says somewhere, speaks of the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling. I always said, well, gee, really Shakespeare maybe had a little bit of 1960s substances, so his eyes were rolling in a fine frenzy. But the issue being that there is something enters consciousness, or something is opened up within consciousness that was closed before. Or the only thing we know is that all of a sudden something is there, and that it is meaningful, and that you are thereby inspired. And this is, of course, also my great ongoing, I don't know what I would call it, argument with 19th century occultism, including my own, at least partially my own tradition, Theosophy, as initially enunciated by Blavatsky and so forth, that what is needed in order to manifest the promise of Blavatsky, let us say, or of Rudolf Steiner, or any of the great gurus or so forth, is what? It is not learning a bunch of facts or in a bunch of data. It is not creating a cosmology which now becomes our prison house. but rather that there has to be a feeling, there has to be a romance, there has to be an enjoyment in the deeper forces of life. And these deeper forces of life, as one of the phrases of Jung said, in turn has to be anchored in the divine. But if there is no divine, then where will you anchor it? So we have deprived ourselves, not of course necessarily in the esoteric tradition, but in the general culture, we have deprived ourselves of that dimension of depth, or that depth of dimension in which our new myth might be born. And that can be a great, obviously a great difficulty. So all of the great mythic structures throughout the world in various cultures are grounded in inspiration. And this inspiration is not a matter of data. It is not a matter of fact, even if that fact is something, such a contradiction in terms as Rudolf Steiner called mystische Tatsache, mystical fact. But it is grounded in a subtle emanation of feeling which makes us aware that there is something present, something is coming, something wants to inspire us. But that is felt. It is not thought. We cannot think ourselves to enlightenment. We cannot think ourselves to gnosis. But we can make a good beginning in that direction by feeling the forces that are drawing us to these experiences. And this is very, very important. And I have in my long, maybe all too long career, certainly have been in touch with numerous people who were so anxious to reach the greater reality, but try to do it with action or inaction, inaction which is the inverse of action, or on the other hand by thinking. And that was all a great big mistake. So if you look at the great figures throughout history, they all depended on inspiration. They all depended on something intangible, something that cannot be put into intellectual categories, but that is present. Now, I have started something last couple of Fridays, and I'll continue with it now, and it's bound to put some of you probably off, whatever that means, to put somebody off. You know. But I'll do it anyway. I've now reached the point in life where if you think that I'm a nut, I don't care. You know, I really don't. So taking that particular risk of being considered parfaitement coucou, as we say in French, or verrückt, or meshuggah in Yiddish, or any number of things, I'll indicate how this, in my own personal experience, which is the only experience I have, how this sort of thing works. Now, I mentioned some strange experiences in my early childhood, I think, last time. And I thought I probably should have left it at that point instead of throwing in something new, but I will. Why? Because when all is said and done, nothing beats experience. If you experience something, then you got it, or it has got you. If you haven't experienced something, you can talk about it, you can think about it, you can write about it, you can be on the computer about it, but it is still far from you. So the personal experience, especially if you can attach some understanding to it, is of very great value. All right, so let me go with a different set of personal experiences now. For the first about 7.5, 8 years of my life, I lived in the countryside of northern Hungary, which has been Czechoslovakia, then became Hungary again, and now it's Slovakia, and I don't know what it will be. You know, the great powers create new countries, but you know what? These new countries don't go on. They don't have staying power. So they created a new country after World War I. Keep that in mind. It was called Czechoslovakia. They put two peoples who have really a different history, only a little bit similar language together, and that was Czechoslovakia. Well, it lasted less than 20 years. In our time, just recently, they did another trick like that, and they called the new country Ukraine. And now it is in grave danger of not continuing either. Because when something is not, well, let's put it that when it is sort of dreamt up in the conference rooms of the great powers and say, look, here you have a new country. Let's draw a red line across this. So half of the city goes to this country, half of the city goes to that country, and so forth. Look at how just, I know that you may feel that this is irrelevant to the subject, and perhaps it is, but look at how many of the countries created or greatly enlarged after World War I in the so-called Versailles peace treaties and so forth have not survived. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Greater Romania in part, Bosnia, all of these were there, were made new Yugoslavia, and they're no longer there. They're no longer there. They're caught up in a whole bunch of other countries. So those things need to be kept in mind. But anyway, this was in a place that had become a couple of countries later on, but we spoke the Hungarian and German language, and up to that point, until about 1944, we were quite happy. Anyway, my family owned land, and it also owned a large, to me very large, magnificent garden, the one end of which there was a chapel, beautiful big trees. It's the first place where I have experienced the Chinese trees that have been revived in the 19th century and brought to Europe, called the ginkgo tree. And now I live in an apartment compound which has the largest and oldest ginkgo tree, I think, in all of Los Angeles. It is on Beechwood Drive, on the east side of the street. If you go down, if you see this huge, gigantic tree, anyway, those are the kind of trees that we had. So here I was, a little fellow, growing up, no brothers, no sisters, no contemporary children to play with. So I wandered around in the garden, and it seemed to me that I had a recurring experience that every time I got to this particular area of the garden, and there was something different about it. And also, even though the sun was shining and there hadn't been any weather to warrant it, that a sort of peculiar mist was moving around there. It was all interested me. Well, after I went to that place and sat there for a while and walked around for a while, the mist began to take shapes. And I thought I saw, and I still think I saw, a variety of beings moving about there. Some of them seemed to recognize me, and they sort of came up and said hello, and others didn't. One of them was even, I'm going to have to quit this, because I already begin to see the disapproving wonderment in your faces. But in any way, one of the creatures, or whatever you want to call there, introduced himself to me. It's all sort of telepathic, there's no human language involved, as a dragon. And he even had a name. But the dragon was a shape changer, as these creatures usually are, and he seldom manifested his draconian, his dragon shape, but he was sort of a vaguely human shape, but he kept saying that he was a dragon. Very interesting fellow. And he gave me a lot of, as you might say, inspiration. And so did others. So this was my little garden in the middle of the big garden that supplied inspiration. I always felt more excited, I always felt more happy, I felt more confident when I had spent some time there than when I was anywhere else. And of course I always need to mention, because credit should be given where it belongs, that my parents were extremely accepting of things like that. Oh yes? Well, what is that? No. And I know that their explanation of these phenomena was that I had a very active imagination. Now, what is that? Perhaps so I came to conclude subsequently, when one has an imagination, when it is activated, one should pay attention to it. That there are important purposes. Incidentally, the art of imagination, even though the active imagination is something that Carl Jung came up with, the art of imagination was first taught and practiced in the Middle Ages by a Christian saint who was elevated to church father later on, and who is also greatly revered by magicians, who is Albertus Magnus, Saint Albert the Great, who was the Archbishop, I think, of Regensburg. And he taught the art of imagination to various people, including a Dominican monk who came to be known as Thomas Aquinas. So, the teacher is often very important. In any event, there are some. These things are often not written down, but there are some notes that were left behind from that period, and the understanding was that the inspiration comes first to the mind, to the soul, and then if you exercise the imagination, then it will take form for communicating with you. In other words, you contribute with your imagination the image in which it will then come to you. And that this is a form of magic. But once again, it is the kind of magic that, like all good magic, that has to be directed by your consciousness. Because I have studied magic, and I won't go into any details, but let's put it this way. A very important issue with magic is that you have to know what you're up to, what you're after, and that you have to be in control of what is happening. You don't just enter the magic theater and then all kinds of things happen to you. But you have to be the director and the actor and heaven knows what else of the magic theater. You as an ego, you as a self have to participate in that. It's very important because we are not engaged in these things in order to relinquish our selfhood, to give up our autonomy to something else. But we maintain our autonomy and we exercise it, and if we do so, then we can have meaningful exchanges and interchanges with various other manifestations of reality. So that is always of very great importance. In any event, for a number of years I was entertained. I didn't want to say I entertained myself, but I was entertained by this very strange creature in that particular portion of the garden. And it has made me aware of something that stayed with me throughout my life up to this point. And that something, that insight was that we are not alone. That there are numerous, very numerous, perhaps innumerable forms of consciousness, being ranging from the very kind of tenuous and not very highly developed to really very complex spiritual beings who can interact with us and who can be useful to us and help us. But at the same time, there are certain things that we need to keep in mind, and one of them being is that whatever happens, whoever comes, you must remain in charge. The magician has to be the commanding influence. If he isn't, then things can go awry. And that is where a lot of the statements, critical statements made against magic and so forth, really, I believe, originate. Now then, let's say I will outline about 5, probably not more than 5 individual injunctions, items of advice to people as to how they might develop and perfect their imagination or their active imagination. First of all, you should have a central topic. This is a key in all magic. I have been at magical evocations, for instance, where a great deal of activity expanded, tons of incense being burned, and many conjurations from the lesser or greater key of Solomon have been enunciated, and then finally something begins to appear. maybe not very visibly, but there's something there. And what is that something often asks in various ways? He says, why did you call me? What is this all about? And you better have some good answer for it, because that can and does quite justly, I think, arouse the ire and the disappointment of spiritual beings. Well, look at it. You did all this rigmarole to call me here, so what do you want? Yeah? It's also very important. Of course, what people generally want, they want a phenomenon. They want the experience. But there should be a central important focus of the experience now. So you should therefore, you want a new myth, you want experiences on which to base a new myth. Here are few items of advice that may be of use. The first of these is that you should have a central focus, a central topic. This is what I want. This is the kind of realities that I would like to have some contact with. These are the kinds of entities that I don't mind if they come, and keep that central focus in mind. You have Eliphas Levi, who was really the reviver and the teacher in modern terms. Well, he was modern. He died in 1875, so that's already the modern age. Who said that there has to be a purpose, and an acceptable purpose of any magical operation. So if you consider this a magical operation, then there has to be a purpose. So there has to be a central topic that you have in mind. I would like to know so-and-so. I would like to have information about this or that. Maybe some things in my own life, maybe in somebody else's life. Not very often about the future, because the disclosures of the future that really come to pass are very rare indeed. And you need to keep in mind that particularly when you inquire about the future, you are likely to get tricked. Why that is, I can't quite tell you. But you may receive the kind of responses which are sometimes misleading and which eventually do not disclose what you wanted. So, but you have to have a central keynote in mind. Maybe some of your own insight, you want more experience, you want clearer experience, whatever the case may be. And so the definite, should be a definite central topic that you have in mind. Because a blank mind will receive blank information. And so when people, the kind of misleading advice that floats around in the New Age or even in the earlier ages is really, really big. And one of them being you just make your mind a blank. Well, you know what? Most of the people who give that advice, and quite a few who receive it, their minds are blank already. So you don't make it, but it's not a matter that you have to empty your mind, but rather that you have the right kind of intentionality, the right kind of question, the right kind of request in your mind. In that case, you will probably receive a useful answer. So have a central topic in mind. And then, let's say, once there is some energy, some inspiration coming in connection with that central topic, then you may expound and expand, perhaps I should have said, expand the central topic at such length and in a manner in which you wish. But you always have to be very circumspect, because although there are, especially the occult life is full of paradoxes. Every statement that one can make can have an opposing statement of denying that statement also. So you have to be very circumspect with these matters. But let's say you can modify and expand the central topic, the central request, the central question that you have as you wish. But you have to be circumspect about it, and you have to be polite about it. In that case, the inspiration is going to begin to come. Now, once that have happened, once inspiration is a very difficult thing to talk about, because there are no specific phenomena connected with it. But when it comes, you'll feel it. There will be a very different feeling in your psyche, in your body, and something will be there of an exciting and joyous nature that hasn't been there before. Now, when that happens, then you need to continue to invite the inspiration and to address your intentionality, your magical will to that inspiration. And it is at that point where the imagination gets into the act very greatly. When you do that, then often the entity or the energy that is there will take on one or more images, which will be of useful to your activity. And that is the image-forming power of your psyche. Always remaining within the context that you are doing this and that you are in control. So when you exercise your power of imagination, then you begin to create your personal myth. It's the figures, the scenes, the visions, the stories, even, because they can be there already too, that appear to your activated imagination. These will be the constituents of your personal myth. Now, a reason that I was inspired to this topic by Tolkien is the fact that, for instance, this was precisely and in a major way the modus operandi of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. He was a young man in World War I, in the army. He was wounded. He came back pretty much shaken up by the experiences, I think, of the Battle of the Marne, which would shake up anybody, and was back in sort of a rehab in England. And while that was going on, he began to experience some strange things, which most people don't know about, which he did not really speak about, but I know a number of people, well, maybe two, who have very assiduously studied Tolkien's career, who will swear that his writing started and in many ways continued all the way to the end on the basis of visions. That his experiences were visionary experiences, but of course, by vision we always think of something that you see, visio. However, with Tolkien, a lot of it was what he heard. And since his field, and then he became a professor at Oxford, was linguistics, he heard a language. And the language he ultimately identified as one of the varieties of the Elfic language, or the language of the elves. And so he heard voices, he saw pictures, and he was experiencing feelings. But of course he knew that if he publicized this a lot, then he would be considered a weird person, just like probably I will be as the result of mentioning these things. So he was very cautious with it. But I have a very good friend of a long time, medical doctor, very highly trained gentleman, who has really made himself a real expert on the life and of the experiences of Tolkien. And I am trying to talk him into now, in a more advanced age. He's a lot younger than I. Isn't everyone younger than I? But, that this should be written up. Tolkien the visionary, and so much else has been written. In any event, there was a language, and then somehow Tolkien received the information, the keys, how to understand that language. So he was able to hear and understand and communicate in one of these varieties of Elfic, I think it's called Kenya, and this made his interaction with the strange world that he had entered a lot easier. And so it went. And so the entirety, not only of the Lord of the Rings, but of his many other writings, because his son, one of his sons, Christopher Tolkien, who inherited all of his father's papers, had eventually published more than 10 volumes of previously unpublished material by Tolkien, which is all in this mythic world into which he gained entrance, and which where the secret language, the Elfic language, was, let's say, very important, and which was sort of the key to him really experiencing what went on in that strange world. So it's quite evident from his own diaries and from his written conversations with people that he was inspired and was constantly in touch with a strange mythic world, which he only in part described in his books. So at a certain point he was persuaded, I think, by a publisher that he really ought to put some of this in book form. And then he sat in Oxford at correcting some papers of students. And And one student was either a trickster or a dumb fellow, who probably wouldn't be admitted in Oxford. One of the students submitted a completely blank paper for a particular exam, nothing, empty. That's the way you make professors angry. And Tolkien sat there with his pen, looking at the blank paper. And while he was thus engaged, he started writing something. And what he wrote was the following strange short sentence: "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And he said he had absolutely no idea what on earth or elsewhere a hobbit might be, and why any such creature should live in a hole in the ground. But it opened up, that was the beginning of the Lord of the Rings. So, see, this is a good example of how strange inspiration can be. Now, I am not talking here about automatic writings when the spirits write to you and so forth and prophesy that you are going to meet the great love of your life day after tomorrow on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and some other street. But that these events happen, and that in any event, let us say it is, if one begins to investigate it, one finds out that a lot of great literary works were written under inspiration, and that therefore inspiration is a desirable thing. And these are, as I mentioned, these are some of the most important elements to keep in mind. Is first of all that there should be a point of concentration, a central topic, and that the power of imagination should be allowed to enter and create images for your personal myth. Now, one of the important elements to keep in mind is that there is a figure, a being that is within you, that you have to keep within bounds. And that figure is precisely that fellow with the Latin name that we spoke about before, called ego, namely the lesser self. Because if it is not, then let's say you are likely to be influenced by forces and by information that is ultimately not to your benefit. And you can use that criterion if the experiences that come to you under these conditions are egotistical in nature. And I don't mean that they have to be malign, that they have to be bad, but just to think that I, now I have inspiration, so I am going to be the great occult writer. Or I am going to write the new great drama of the century under inspiration, or whatever else you may be doing. When that I enters the picture, it muddies the waters. So that as soon as your personal selfhood. Your celestial selfhood is, let's say, made very important, exalted, and things like that, then watch out. Because there you have the presence of forces which ultimately are not going to be beneficial. So this is a very difficult topic to speak about. If I had any sense, I wouldn't have spoken about it. But I think that I can put some of it across. The Templar, the Knights Templar in the Middle Ages, who were a very interesting group and have a very interesting history. There are all sorts of things connected with them, which I think are of considerable interest. They had a motto for the order: non nobis domine, non nobis sed nomen tuo da gloria. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, O Lord, but to thy name be the glory. The idea being the temptation to allow an inflation to enter into your ego, even though it is fairly innocent, is very, very great. And so you have to abjure your personal selfhood. Because I am not involved in this, or maybe a higher part of me is involved in it, but you have to be very careful not to allow an egotistical impulse to enter these kinds of things, because that will take away ultimately the purpose of what you are doing. So what I have really been describing here is a certain kind of an approach to personal magic, whereby the myth can be created. And why do I say that the myth can be created? Because certain, this I can testify to, certain elements will appear. A certain story will appear. A certain motives will appear, which become very meaningful to you. And then upon this may be based your own personal myth, which will be helpful to you, and whereby inspiration, further inspiration may come to you. So, incidentally, the stories that exist about Albertus Magnus and his disciple Saint Thomas Aquinas, who became a great saint also, are really quite instructive. I may have mentioned this before in some context, but it is said, and that was something that occurred to people at that time, that Albertus Magnus had a kind of a magical robot. He had a statue that would speak. If it was addressed, it would give answers and would make prophecies and things of that sort, which apparently was quite common in the medieval magic. Another person who had one like that and was quite known in Rome because of it was a pope, Pope Sylvester II, who was originally a French Benedictine monk and eventually rose to become pope. And he became known as the magician pope. He is of particular interest to me because he is the pope who sent the Holy Crown of Hungary to the first Hungarian king, Saint Stephan. Mm-hmm. So I always said, well, there must be some good magic there, and there was, because an injudicious American government, which of course abound, they're always around, at a certain point when the Soviets were still in charge of Hungary and the communist government, sent this this sacred historical relic and sent it back to Hungary, because during the war it had been in the custody of the American forces and eventually in Fort Knox. So the Hungarian community in exile was extremely unhappy about it, and there the late Archduke Otto, who would have been our king at this time, the son of our last king, said the last word, and I saw his letter in the newspaper. He said, "Don't be alarmed. That crown has its own will. It's not going to fall into the wrong places. Keep praying and be good, and the crown will take care of itself, and you don't need to worry. The crown does not need you to defend it at this point. It will defend itself." And it did. And now it is in the Houses of Parliament, and if you go to Budapest and there is nothing going on in the Parliament, which was unfortunately when we were there, then you can see it. It's exhibited in the entry hall. So the crown that came from the magician Pope Sylvester II. But in any event, the same thing was obtaining apparently with Albertus Magnus. And so Albertus had this magical statue speaking. But he was an archbishop of Regensburg, I think. And so he was out doing things. And Thomas, his disciple, was in their quarters. And Thomas was so annoyed by the frequent chattering of this magical statue that he took some heavy object and he smashed it. And Albertus came back and said, "Where is my, I don't know what they called it, my homunculus?" "Oh," he said, "that takes so long to create one of these, and look what you did now." So this was the ill deed of Saint Thomas Aquinas, who nevertheless became a saint and who wrote beautiful, beautiful religious poetry, psalms of a liturgical nature, and who then, ordered by the church, was also the first great theologian, of course, and that is the Thomistic theology, and wrote a great big, and to me, pardon my lowly opinion of you, St. Thomas, but tremendously boring book called the Summa Theologica, the summation of theology. But before his death, he was preaching a sermon in an open church. He came out and he said, "I want you to know and I want to proclaim that everything that I wrote on theology was so much straw. It is worthless. Because now I know something else, and now I know something more." And then he gave them the blessing, and according to one of the stories, there are always several stories like that, he then went into his private chapel, where the sacrament was exposed all the time, and except for a few, couple of hours a day, he remained in the chapel in ecstasy. So he came to discover that the mystical communion with the deity was more important than writing about the deity. In any event, he is the one who had that bad introduction to his teacher, Albertus, by smashing the magical statue. Now, I'm sure that you're tremendously interested by all of these things, and you're now thinking as to where else you might have gone where you would have been more entertained than here. No. In any event, the reason I'm bringing up all this disparate, peculiar stuff is because I feel that the element of inspiration and of imagination is of extremely great importance. And now, of course, all spiritual things require dedication, require care, and I am of the Christian Gnostic tradition, so I use those terms, but I can use another term too. They require a prayerful attitude. One should address itself to the higher power when you are asking for inspiration, when you are asking for being guided in and inspired by these matters and by the imagination. You'll be surprised. These are matters in which it is nice to be surprised very often. I well remember, on some occasions where something was coming, some visionary experience made its appearance, and I had the feeling that it was incomplete. I said, doggone it, why isn't this working better? And then quickly I said a prayer that I had turned around that really became meaningful. So the experience can be charged, can be made more meaningful, can be made more powerful when there is a prayerful attitude on the part of the individual. And what by all means you have to avoid is that something should benefit you at the ego level. I always wanted to write a book, so come on, now I'll invoke an entity to help me write a book. No, you don't have to do that. If you have something to say and you have a clear mind, and you sit up late at night on Beechwood Drive, maybe after 2 o'clock or so, with a Royal manual typewriter, and then you write and you write and you write, and your neighbors are tearing their hair because of all the noise that you are making and so forth. But you know what? Some pretty good material has been written that way, and I know because I did it. So sometimes you just have to keep those things in mind. But I can testify with the greatest degree of veracity that we have within ourselves the ability to be inspired, and in conjunction with our inspiration to be guided, to be given the kind of inspired material that will be most helpful to us, and that this can be very helpful influences in our lives. So it's very, very important to know these matters. So explanation for it is pretty much the same, namely, as we have in the Gnostic worldview. We are entities, we are beings and persons of many facets. And we have to learn in the course of our life to exercise our consciousness in these several facets. In other words, even we should not be satisfied with the physical world, because the physical world can disclose only so much. Neither should we be, even though we should utilize the forces therein, we should not be satisfied with the emotional world, for the main reason that unless it is reinforced, it can be deceptive, and it can be evanescent. It can quickly disappear. We have a big emotion along inspirational lines, and you are there trying to work with the inspiration, and lo, the inspiration is gone away. So, you have to be, for one thing, you have to have a steadiness of mind. And Dr. Francis Israel Regardie, who was the great reviver, really, of the Golden Dawn magical tradition in the English-speaking world, always used to say that you have to be persistent. When you are striving for something in the inner worlds, when you are doing magic also, you have to be persistent, because the influences that would like you to diverge are always there. So you have to have a one-pointed persistence, and of course there are many other issues involved. So we should all keep in mind that being children of the Most High, emanations of the high aeons, we have within us the capacity to call on our deeper nature, that we have a deeper nature, and that when we call upon it, it will come and it will instruct us, and it will take us to pleasant and inspired places. And it will lead us away from the manifestations of the shadow, which of course always can come in, and of the excessive inflationary tendencies of the ego. We have to keep on saying with the Templars, not to me, O Lord, but to thy name be the glory. In other words, there is something higher, and it is that higher that we are addressing, and from the higher that we seek guidance, and we have to really mean it. Because in today's world, we said before, a secular world that has pretty much gotten away from the God image of the earlier periods, we might end up with, when you treat the spiritual worlds and their experience lightly, the results that you get will also be lightweight. But if you realize that you are doing something important, you are asking for results that are important, and that you intend to use for a good purpose, then you are going in the right direction. So this is sort of a little excursion into the magic of the soul today, and I hope it is of some importance, because what was that? There was a song that was fairly popular in the 60s. God is alive, magic is alive. It was a singer, a lady singer, and we are right now, right here in this room, we are surrounded by presences and forces that are not visible to us. You cannot see them, you cannot touch them, and probably you cannot hear them either. But if you cultivate within yourself the awareness, if you continue to remember that you are living in not only in a universe, but you are living in an unobstructed reality. And by unobstructed, I mean that the beings of another dimension, being of the high aeons, angelic and otherwise, are there. And if you ask for their inspiration, if you ask for their assistance, if you ask for these things, they will come to you. Because we live in a universe where every element is interconnected by a common intentionality and a common meaning. And if we take advantage of that, then our lives will increase in meaning, our lives will have more intention, and the superficiality and the egotism, the the inflation of the ego will go away. I can say I'm not in the best of shape. This was the best I could do this evening, but I hope that I managed to convey to you something that is a matter of experience. I know these things, I've been there, and they've been where I am, and we do have a great deal of contact, we have a great deal of help, which we can call upon, and if we are well-intentioned, and if our desire is a cooperation with the ultimate reality, then we will be guided, we will be blessed, and we will change into something greater, something more spiritual, because ultimately the idea of the alchemical transformation is one of the higher aspects of this kind of change. So be aware of that, realize that we are, even if there is nobody around human, that we are not alone, because there are inspiring and transformative presences that are here and that are not only willing but that are eager to help us and have helped many of us, and they still will. But you have to be able to close the egotistical door. You know, if we are venturing into these realms because I want something for myself, then what I will get will be shoddy. But if I want it, if I want this to appear so that I can thereby open up more consciousness, be more helpful to others. So as Madame Blavatsky always said that's where the Buddhists have got it right, that the greatest motivating power of all spirituality should be compassion. If you experience something great, the next thing is how can I make this available to others? And some of us have tried to do that throughout a lifetime, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. But if we strive for the right, then we are devoted to a heavenly cause. I am not going to try to recount that great and wonderful song from the man from La Mancha, but it's all there. Look it up. It's all there. We may be on earth, but we are on earth serving a heavenly cause, and the heavens call to us. The heavens call to us, and as we heed the call, then once again, in the words of Dame Julian of Norwich, whom we mentioned before, then all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Without it, nothing is worth anything. With it, everything is worth a great deal. We are living in a world that is filled with treasure, but we have to have the ability to relate to it and to make it available to us and to others who need it. And then, as the Lord Christ is said to have said in the New Testament about His church, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. We might add to it, the gates of heaven may open to us. They can, they have in the past, they will, and they do now. This I can affirm, this I can try to communicate to you, and may we all be blessed and continue along these lines. And thank you very much.